Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to K's Hidden Shelf where we talk about books. Today I'm going to share with you my October wrap-up. Let's just jump in with the first book that I read, being The Seventh Cadence by Jim Wilbourne. This is book 1 in the Continua Chronicles. Now this is a bit of a chunker, so I'm just going to put it on the shelf for a moment. The Seventh Cadence is a self-published high fantasy epic featuring war, dragons, magic, lore, found family, and this is a slow burn with a satisfying avalanche towards the end. The story here is that the Tissaran Dominion has returned to reclaim their homeland and to restore their ways of life to the heathens of Hertzora. As war stirs, 3 unlikely heroes come together to protect the kingdom, while also trying to find their own place within the world. Now, I really enjoyed the slow burn of this book. We really get to know the characters well throughout the story, from their internal struggles to the external circumstances they are faced with. We follow 3 main points of view throughout the story. One from Telly, a scientist out to protect her family's legacy, but also explore and learn more about the world they reside in. Navid, who has been tasked to find Telly, along with fulfilling his own life goals. And finally, Gabriel, a prince determined to find his own path in life and protect his people. We're also given a wide side cast of characters who clearly got quite a bit of care and attention put into their own character works. I found myself really feeling for the side characters as much as I did the main characters. Along with the great character work and character development that we see, I quickly found myself invested in the characters along with their circumstances. All of that to say, it was easy to become invested in the characters. I found them both likable and unlikable. I was interested in their motivations and their struggles, along with their growth throughout the story. These are characters that I look forward to coming back to. Moving along, there was also quite a bit of travel in this book. Now, while there is travel, there was quite a bit to keep me engaged in the story, and this wasn't just weeks of traveling on end and talking about trees. This was action scenes put in there, chases, and just intimate dialogue thrown in there as well. All of it was mixed really well with the world building, the action, and the story. Speaking of world building, it felt familiar but unique at the same time. Comparing to other authors, the world building felt natural to the story's progression and just gives you hints and little drops throughout the story rather than dumping it all in at once. It's a natural progression as you go through the story and discover this world as the characters travel. I often found myself forgetting that world building was happening because it just felt so natural for this reason. The world is also large here, with a variety of cultures and people across the dominions. This also had a refreshing take on dragons, which I really appreciated too. There were also a multitude of themes woven into the Seventh Cadence, giving it a philosophical feeling at times, while it explored humanity, ethics, the meaning of honor, grief, and so much more were touched on. Now, while this was mostly a slow burn, everything felt like it had a purpose, and that it was just so much happening that kept me engaged. For this reason, this is the kind of book that I'm going to be thinking about or theorizing about for quite some time. This made for a strong debut from Jim Wilbourne, and an author that I feel is going to be on my watch radar, as this author is just going to get better over time, and I can't wait to see that growth. And especially with the way this debut is, I'm just looking forward to it. That being said, the next couple books that I read were also by Jim Wilbourne. So right after I had read The Seventh Cadence, I was also provided an e-arc at the time for the continuation of the story being in a novella format, and that is Strangers in the Promised Land. I'm going to put this little guy up with his friend. So Strangers in the Promised Land is a novella continuing after the events of the Seventh Cadence, so technically 1.5 in the series. Now, while it is a continuation of the Seventh Cadence, you technically don't have to read it if you don't want to. It's not tied to the major plot points of the 7th Cadence, but rather gives you more insight into a few of the main characters we had seen from the 7th Cadence, which I personally adored. So for those who have not read the 7th Cadence yet, just be mindful that the story overview here may have spoilers for the 7th Cadence. So skip ahead if you do not want to be spoiled. The story of these strangers in the Promised Land follow mainly Amy and Mara Kruve. They've been left wandering the land with nothing but their clothes and an injured horse. Meanwhile, 3 Dessarian Dominion soldiers desert their army to escape the ravages of war. The 2 groups here cross paths, and these soldiers insist on escorting the young ladies home. However, tensions begin to rise, as not everything is as it seems. I really loved getting to know Amy and Mara more as characters. They were intriguing, but we get more depth to them than we've previously seen in the 7th Cadence. This novella, yes, had a lot of tension and intriguing scenarios, but this felt like a lot of character work more than anything. With the great character work and development that we see for Amy and Mara in this novella, quickly made them some of my favorite characters across these stories so far. There was also an excellent exploration of the dynamic between these sisters' relationship, showing you the strengths and the weaknesses in each of these characters, along with how this compromises their relationship. Now, while there were characters that I loved, there was also a character that I loved to hate. I can't talk about it anymore because I really just disliked this character, but oh, it was so good to dislike this character. What really shines here is Jim Wilbourne's ability to not only build suspense, but balance it with great character work. It was truly the highlight here, as the character work was not overshadowed by the events, the action, the tension of the situations that happened. Overall, this made for a captivating story, and at just over 100 pages, we get great pacing with much more packed into it than I anticipated. We see self-discovery, suspense, action, blood, great character developments, and a well-crafted story. This just made an excellent continuation of the Continua Chronicles. Now, if you've already read the 7th Cadence and you're not sure on whether or not to pick up the novella, I highly recommend that you do. You don't have to in order to continue with the story in the series, but you're missing out on some fantastic storytelling and characters. Following that, I signed up for Jim Wilbourne's email newsletter as I wanted to be kept in the loop on his writing. As a result, I ended up getting a short story called First Blood. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about this just because it is so short. It's a very quick read. I think it's only 20 or 30 pages, if that. And it is a prequel short story to the 7th Cadence and explores one of the main characters in more depth, looking at the events that happened to this character and led them up to the story in the 7th Cadence and who they became at that time. Now, I'm going to keep these up here because we're going to continue right along with Jim Wilbourne. I had signed up for Jim's email newsletter, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that I actually got a short story by signing up for their newsletter. Now, this short story is called First Blood, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it just because it is very short. I believe 20 to 30 pages maybe. And it is essentially a prequel short story to the events of the 7th Cadence. This gives us an insight into one of the main characters, Telly, and what happened to her prior to the events of 7th Cadence. This was great to give us a little bit more look into her past and where she came from when we see her in the 7th Cadence. So that was great. It was really nice to see more about Telly, and it was a quick, short read. So if you haven't already and you're interested in the Continua Chronicles, I definitely recommend that this is a good place to start. This gives you a taste of Jim Wilbourne's writing. It's free signing up for the email newsletter if that's still available at the time that this video goes out. But you also get some insight into one of the main characters and what they go through. It's just a great way to at least dip your toes into the series before committing to a bit of a chunker. So those were all of the Jim Wilbourne reads. Thank you, Bookshelf, for holding the heavy books. I'm going to pull those down now. I also forgot to mention the ratings. So I ended up giving the seventh Cadence 4 out of 5 stars and the Strangers in the Promised Land 4.5 out of 5 stars. Let's move on. The next two books are ones that I've already done full spoiler-free reviews for, so I will leave cards up top where you can find those and learn more about these books, and I'm just going to touch on these next two briefly. The next book I read was The Acktus Trials by D.T. Kane. This is book 1 in the Spoken Books Uprising series, a self-published fantasy. Now, I did receive this copy in exchange for an honest review, and this is a dangerous world with a deep history and a magic system that was captivating right from the first page. While we follow a young man called Bastion or Baz throughout this story, he is a speaker but also a slave. He was born with the ability to speak words of power from these spoken books, which is the method to cast magic in this world. However, people of Baz's station are forbidden from learning to read or write. This limits their abilities, their powers, and gives controls to their masters, who instead open the books and read aloud the words for these speakers to repeat. However, this magic system is not perfect because even if the master or the speaker make a mistake in the pronunciations of the word, there are physical consequences to the speaker. Now, all of this takes place in the land of oration. Centuries ago, a cataclysmic event nearly destroyed the land. This prompted the hunt and enslavement of speakers. Now, when Baz learns that he needs to accompany his master, heir to the Duke of the Torchshire libraries, in the Acktus trials, he is less than enthusiastic. In this trial, the dukes send their heirs to the city of Tome, where the origination of this cataclysmic event took place, but also holds potential new spoken books that these cities have not seen. Unfortunately, most don't live through the Acktus trials, and those who do are often left scarred. People of Baz's station, such as a speaker, are considered expendable as well. However, when Bastion's master's life becomes threatened, he reveals a secret he's been hiding. He can read. After saving his master's life, he strikes a bargain, assisting his master in achieving the Acktus trials and obtaining a new spoken book of power in exchange for keeping his secret and hopefully his life, as even holding a book, let alone learning to read, is punishable by death for Bastion. The world building was captivating here. From the very first page, you were thrown right into the land of oration, its magic, its people, and the main characters, and it just grips you in with a compelling scene. There's also a complexity to not only the magic system, but the society that's built in oration as a result of the cataclysmic event. Yes, there are masters and those in power, however, there's also a hierarchy in amongst the slaves themselves, as these speakers are not the only slaves or level of slaves within oration. Now, with the hierarchy where your status is determined by family lineage or the abilities you have been born with, this made for dynamic relationships in a complex world. It also ended up creating scenes that were gripping and added a layer of tension to the characters' interactions, as slaves are considered expendable and like property rather than people. Between the incredible world, the intriguing relationships and dynamics and complexities that I wasn't even expecting, this was a great read. This had self-discovery, mystery, a quest, dragons, magic, action, great characters, and an exploration of right versus wrong. This had so much more complexity into the magic system, the world, and the characters than I had initially anticipated, and I absolutely loved it. I ended up missing the world after I finished reading this, and I am currently reading book 2, Declaimer's Discovery, and I'm about halfway through that at the moment, and I am really happy to be back in the world along with these characters, as the characters just get better as I'm reading. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I think there is a lot to love, and I feel like a lot of fantasy readers, whether you are new to fantasy or seasoned, will enjoy this. And finally, the last book I read was actually via an audiobook, and this was an e-arc provided to me by one of the authors in exchange for an honest review, and that was The Alchemy of Sorrow by a variety of authors. Now, I knew going into this that I was going to be in for an emotional read. However, I never expected my heart to feel so broken yet so full at the same time. The Alchemy of Sorrow is a sci-fi fantasy anthology containing 13 short stories following themes of sorrow, grief, loss, and change. Each author did a phenomenal job at capturing the beauty of these themes in their own ways, making each short story different in how the themes are explored and how they impact the reader. Now, not all of these stories impacted me in the same way. Some didn't quite emotionally impact me as others did. However, they were still beautifully told, and there is something for everyone in this anthology. Now, I'm not going to give an individual review of each short story for this, as we will be here all day. I will say that from the first short story to the last, I was tearing up at some, emotionally moved by others, or left contemplating aspects of my own life. Each story poses questions to the reader, having them contemplate difficult aspects or scenarios within life, including sorrow and loss. For me, these weren't just short stories. These were reminders that it is okay to not be okay. This book gives you a place to feel vulnerable and explore these very difficult emotions and scenarios. The authors also treat these topics with great care and thought. Some of my personal favorite short stories included Skies on Fire by Sonya M. Black, Death in the Uncanny Valley by M.L. Wang, Thicker Than Water by Carol A. Park, A Matter of Trust by Angela Boord, and The Paperweight Watch by Krystle Matar. Now, I ended up binging this in about 2 or 3 days. Like I said, I was left feeling very broken, but my heart also felt very full. I do recommend giving yourself time in between each short story to absorb the message and the emotions from each one. For this reason, I look forward to coming back to this anthology and taking a slower pace with these stories. What really impressed me was if these authors can achieve what they did in such a short page count with short stories, I am very eager to read what else they've written, to see what they can do with an even longer page count. And of course, a huge thank you to all of the authors for writing these incredibly impactful stories, giving readers a place to feel vulnerable, including myself, and giving me new perspectives. From sorrow, grief, and hope, this anthology took me through them all. This was a remarkable and emotional read that I will definitely be coming back to. Overall, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Now, I know this is an anthology with short stories, and if I'm looking at each individual short story, I wouldn't give any of them lower than a 4.5 rating, as they were all just incredible. Overall, the anthology itself as a whole, I'm giving 5 out of 5 stars for the incredible experience that it gave me. So that is everything I've read in October. I'd love to hear, what did you read in October? Did you have a favorite? Did you have one that was unexpected? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments down below. As always, thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.